Were you actually adopted?
Yeah.
I haven't met somebody who's been adopted who doesn't have some form of attachment trauma. We all need attachment. And there's studies of this, right? Like in Poland, post-World War II, the babies that had lost their mothers and fathers, the babies that weren't picked up and held died at an exponentially higher rate. When we have an attachment interruption as a kid, our need for attachment doesn't go away. Our need for attachment just changes. And so what ends up happening is addiction. We don't attach to a person, we attach to a substance, to an object, or we attach to a behavior.
I want to talk cocaine, alcohol, cheating. Talk to me about people such as myself. I think in my mind I would have thought it was escapism, but maybe it was self-sabotage.
Well,
Connor Beaton is an entrepreneur,
writer, keynote speaker, and founder of ManTalks.
Connor and James talk about the power dynamics of relationships,
cocaine abuse in high performers, and
what is the problem with self-sabotage?
a lot of high performers, they get that accolade and all of a sudden they're like, I feel fucking empty. They're using sabotage to produce more fuel in their psyche and in their systems in order to get more results.
For those that have probably followed me for a long time on social media, you would have seen the books that we'd had to market and promote to become a 3-times #1 bestselling author, the fitness business with over 125,000 people go through it, New Tonic, which has recently raised a $20 million valuation. I've had to be very much involved in marketing online using social media. And for that reason, I now share the skills, expertise, and experiences with other people. So whether you're an accountant, a personal trainer, a physio, or someone looking to build a personal brand online, I now help people do it. Rather than wasting your time during this podcast to tell you more about it, I just ask at some point, you either go to jamessmith.business, the website, to check out my business mentorship, or go to my YouTube, James Smith Business, or my Instagram, James Smith Business. Listen to the things that I'm saying, check out some of my content, and see if it vibes with you. Okay, that's enough of your time. Let's get back to the episode. Connor, what is the problem with self-sabotage?
Yeah, the real problem with self-sabotage is that it's not laziness, it's not a lack of discipline like people think, and it's specifically not to be out of control. This is the biggest misperception, the biggest problem with self-sabotage is that people think it's about them seeking to be out of control. The biggest problem with self-sabotage is that it's actually about your brain, your psyche, your mind trying to move you back into control. And it's a protective strategy. It's something that you've actually built and developed in order to feel safe in some way, shape, or form, which is completely the opposite to how most people think about it. So that's the biggest problem, because we stay stuck. We can't actually move out of it when we have the perception that we're just trying to get out of control and, screw up our life and wreck our finances and wreck our health and wreck our relationships. That's not the case at all.
So when you had the conversation with Chris, you had like a high-level conversation. I want to go straight into the bottom. I want to talk cocaine, alcohol, cheating. So if I look back at my 20s, almost all of it, everything was so controlled throughout the week, but the weekends were wild, and it would be drinking until I black out. I think there was maybe some, I hope I don't turn this into a free therapy session. There might be elements as well where I know I had to do the work to become more confident with women, but I could just drink my way out of that. Talk to me about people such as myself, 20-something rugby player, that would just get blackout as a form. I think in my mind I would have thought it was escapism, but maybe it was self-sabotage.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Would you constitute that as self-sabotage, or is that you trying to rebuke and sort of like butt against how much constraint and structure you had in your life?
Well, this is the thing. I probably don't know. And during the week, the crazy thing is Monday to Friday, the narrative was I'm health seeking. I want to be healthy. I want to be strong. I want to, be a good role model, a good athlete. Then the second I'd get to the weekend, I'd throw all that away. And again, there's this really interesting, if I could be crass, with men out there, there's two different psychologies, pre and post ejaculation. You got post and that clarity. We talk about it a lot. And I remember there'd be a lot of women throughout my 20s where, they'd say, oh, you said we were going to go for breakfast. Like, look, there was a different version of me that negotiated that deal, I'm afraid. But then there's another version of men, especially at the moment, that say it's like pre-post beers, especially when it comes to cocaine finding its way to the conversation. Sober, don't want to do it, don't know where it's come from, no, this isn't good for me. 2 pints later, I'll be the first one to say, look, lads, we're not getting on it this weekend. But then I'll be the first one that says, right, lads, now we are. So it's crazy that there are these little triggers, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, that we can almost tap into a completely different psychology to we were before.
Right. Well, I think you're pointing out a really important part of sabotage, and that is that we do it to reinforce a belief or a perception of ourselves. So we always do it to reinforce something that we believe about ourselves. And that can be that we're a clusterfuck. It can be that we're a mess. It can be that we are shit at relationships. It can be that, we're just a disaster. We have no self-control. I've got no impulse control. But sabotage is always to reinforce something about our personality and identity that we believe is true, but it's often just that we don't like that part about ourselves. So again, the behaviors oftentimes look like being out of control. But when you start to look at the pattern's almost always identical, right? I mean, you just laid it out, right? It's like 2 beers deep, cocaine comes out, women, pizza, whatever it is. And the next morning, it's here's how I feel, here's the shame, here's how I shit on myself and, beat the living crap out of myself because I did that same stupid thing again last night. And then, the cycle repeats. And so it's a very familiar pattern. And again, we're deploying that pattern because it's reinforcing what Jung would call like a shadow part of ourselves, right? Like a part of ourselves that we don't like, that we don't know how to deal with, that we don't want other people to know about. But it's reinforcing something about us that we don't know how to contend with. Or it's reinforcing a truth within us that we don't want to admit, like maybe you just wanted some freedom, but you didn't know how to have some freedom or lacking in restriction without just going completely wild. Or maybe there's a narrative inside of you, because I think your story is very relatable. I did the same thing, by the way, not cocaine, but, like women and, drugs and booze and partying and, 2 a.m. Pizza in Vancouver and shit like that. I mean, that's the same cycle, but we're reinforcing something about our identity that we don't know how to contend with. And then that cycle plays out over and over and over and over again. And the interesting thing is so many of the high performing men that I've worked with, their sabotage patterns are meticulous. It's kind of a funny thing, it's like the same cycle every single time, whether they're, hiring some escort or they're messaging some woman that they know isn't good for them or, whatever it is that they're doing to sabotage, eating chips and ice cream at 11:30 at night when they've said that they're not going to and they're going to go to bed. The cycle is almost always very clear, and how they feel about it is very clear. And so it's something that we move back to control, move back into control. And we do that because our brain is it's a pattern recognition machine. Our brain is comfortable with things that are familiar. So if you have a belief about yourself that like, I'm a piece of shit, or I'm never going to amount to anything, or whenever I'm about to, get the promotion or achieve this big result, I sabotage and I can't follow through. If you have that belief, then your brain is going to want to follow through on that belief, and it's going to want to create a pattern that it can use whenever that belief system comes up. And so your brain is just designed, and this is how I'll wrap up this part of it. Your brain is designed to move you towards patterns, decisions, and choices that it knows and are familiar, even if those decisions, patterns, and choices are harmful, toxic, unhealthy, and move you away from decisions, patterns, and choices that are unfamiliar, even if those decisions, patterns, and choices are wanted, even if they're healthy. So this is the hard thing, is that we can have these really unhealthy decisions and choices that we call sabotage behaviors or sabotage mechanisms, and we keep choosing them. And people say, why? Why do I keep choosing them? Well, it's because they're familiar to your brain. They're known. And sitting at home and meditating on a Saturday night is very unknown. It's unfamiliar. Your brain doesn't know how to predict it. It doesn't know how it's going to feel. And so it will actively avoid moving you down that path. It's why creating new habits, even if they're healthy for you, is very, very challenging.
When you say that, the first person I think about is John Jones. Are you familiar with the UFC fighter?
Yeah, definitely.
And so straight away, he went through a stint of not only being one of the best to ever do it as a world champion, but he then openly admitted that he was getting absolutely fucked up before his fights, snorting cocaine, drinking alcohol, going out partying and not sleeping. And it almost sounds from what you're saying there like it was a protective mechanism, part of his identity, which could almost make it okay if he lost. Because I think that if he lost, he could then say, right, well, my identity is that I'm a piece of shit at the parties and I'm not built for this whatever lifestyle. And it was almost like a protective mechanism, but it wasn't true. It was a belief, but his results almost showed that his beliefs weren't true.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, and that pattern, like notice he's created a behavioral pattern that then he becomes reliant on. Athletes are incredibly superstitious, right? And so when he would go to think about, okay, maybe I shouldn't get fucked up the night before I have a fight, because that's probably, at some level there's cognitive dissonance, right? He's probably like, I know this is not great for my performance tomorrow, but I'm going to go do it anyway because that's the thing that I've always done. And so our brain, our body, our nervous system will just move us towards what's known and familiar because there's a kind of safety in that. And sabotage is a survival mechanism. In many ways, it's a survival mechanism that protects us from a few things. It protects us from attachment issues and attachment relational issues that we've dealt with. You sabotage oftentimes not because you fear failure relationally, but because you fear losing a connection or you fear getting the connection that you actually want. I see this all the time with guys where they're in a relational dynamic. They're with somebody where, the quantity or the volume of sex isn't what they want it to be. And then they're given a very specific direction of moving more towards having sex happen more frequently or more often or more, more satisfying. And they end up sabotaging it because they're afraid of getting what they want, because what they're familiar with is the lack of connection. And so we'll sabotage in that way because we're trying to protect against what we know when it comes to our relationships and our attachment. And then we are protecting from our nervous system. We have a nervous system set point, right? We're used to a certain level or a certain kind of stress, tension, drama, calmness, success, fatigue, and anything that feels foreign is going to be something that we move away from. And so if you're used to super high stress and how you're used to dealing with that high stress is, drinking, doing drugs, porn usage, whatever it is, it's going to be very hard to move away from that because your nervous system has adopted these strategies as a kind of stress reduction mechanism or a coping mechanism for the intensity that you feel inside. And if you don't have replacement tools that can help you get that same result, your brain and your nervous system or your brain and your body are just going to keep choosing those sabotage mechanisms. Because I would imagine if I talked to John Jones long enough and had a session with him and he was willing to actually dive into it and dig into the shit, he'd probably underneath the core, and again, this is obviously speculation, say that he's nervous in some way, shape, or form. I've never met a fighter, and I've worked with some great UFC fighters who don't feel a kind of panic's not quite the right word, but there's a really intense nervousness and anxiousness before you get into a fight. And any dude that's been in a fight knows that. They know that feeling. I've been in maybe not a lot, but I've been in a bunch of hockey fights, bar fights, and right before it happens, right when you know it's going to happen, there's just this electric intensity inside of you. Now imagine knowing that you're about to go into that extremely high stress situation, right? Just like the businessman that's, the next day he's got to go do this big presentation to close a deal for financing on his company or his company collapses, right? That's an intense amount of stress that courses through your system. And if you don't have proper tools to deal with it, your brain and your body are going to use the old tools that you learned very early on. And most of us as men have just used, drugs, porn, booze, women as outlets for stress reduction, for stress coping.
George St-Pierre, I think, said it best, one of your boys. He said, courage isn't to not be scared. Courage is to be scared, but to do it anyway. And he says that throughout his whole career, there was only one fight that he slept well the night before. I think it was Matt Serra. And he said every night, didn't sleep. I'd lay in bed, tossing and turning, scared I was going to lose. And the one time he wasn't scared, he lost. And it was kind of the craziest thing for him. But he welcomed it. He said that he had gone so long undefeated that the pressure was there. And when he got beaten, he said that this weight was just dropped off his shoulders. And it actually weirdly made him a better fighter. Weirdly though, you don't get the same opportunity in, say, marriage, where you can't
Right.
just go out and take a big loss and then come back and say, "Babe, I'm all the weight's off my shoulders now. I'm ready to go."
I
Uh,
really needed to bang that hooker. Like, that really was necessary. I've learned my lesson. We're good now.
it's interesting by everything that you say, but so I remember there was a period of my life where I was experiencing really bad anxiety on a Sunday after going out and partying, and I'd done this for 10, 15 years. And I remember waking up and saying to a friend one day, everything on paper last night was great. I went out with my friends, I hooked up, I didn't spend too much. Why am I so anxious? Why am I full of dread? Now, it could have been the cocaine. And in Australia, we get terrible stuff. But then I actually think there was a conflict in my beliefs where I think deep down I knew that what I was doing was wrong or it wasn't congruent. There was a cognitive dissonance where for 10 years I said to people, oh, I'm probably going to get married, have kids, move out of Bondi and have a quiet life on the beach with a dog. But everything in my life was going in the complete opposite direction. It was actually moving towards 30 something bachelor, money, success, fame, absolutely zero of the things that I told people I wanted. Now, good news is I have since gone to everything that I wanted, but we touched on it before. Is cognitive dissonance something that could tear people apart or put them on the tracks that they need?
I mean, I think it depends on the individual and the scenario. You can have that level of cognitive dissonance and it can really be harmful. And for some people, it can pull them back. Um, Usually it pulls them back through some type of breakdown and catastrophe, right? I think that's the big piece. But I think that happens because this behavior of self-sabotage is in many ways self-reinforcing, right? Like the biggest problem we could say is not just that self-sabotage is misperceived, like people misunderstand it, but also that it reinforces old stories about yourself. It reinforces these limiting beliefs. It reinforces the shame that you have about yourself. It gives you evidence that you can't trust yourself. And so Carl Jung, this psychologist, this great Swiss psychologist that I studied for a long time and sort of trained in, he talked a lot about this concept of the shadow. And that's the part of us that we just don't like. We don't want to deal with. We don't want other people to know about it. We're ashamed of it. We feel afraid of it. There's insecurities. And sabotage is the tool that we use to produce more of that, right? Sabotage is the tool that we use to reinforce I'm a piece of shit. Saturday nights, I always get out of control, and I drink too much and do too much cocaine. I'm just using your example. By the way, I never touched cocaine because it was like the one drug where I was like, if I do that, I know I'm going to like it too much and that's going to be a problem. Like as soon as I heard about it and I heard somebody describe it, I was like,
Do you know,
I know myself well enough that I was just like, do not touch
I'm
that.
going to interject quickly just before you go into the Carl Jung piece. So I have someone who's done a lot of cocaine. I think it's worse than that, and I'll tell you why. So yourself, you say like, oh, it's, it sounds too good to be true. I do it all the time. But I think it was Jordan Peterson that said, don't ask people why they do coke. Ask them why they don't do it every night. And I would say maybe 95%, again, speculative, of people that do cocaine actually just do it when they want. And I think in some cases that makes it worse because if it was such an amazing drug that you had to do it all the time, it would destroy so many lives that we would see a narrative that we shouldn't do it. But I think that almost all high achieving individuals actually control their cocaine use very well. And they can touch it once every few months, once every couple of weeks, whenever it is. And I think that can almost make it more dangerous because I would argue that I feel completely in control of my cocaine use to the point that if you said, you're not having it for a year, fine. Not having it for 5 years, fine. Oh, there's some on a private jet. Oh, go on then. So it's one of those drugs where I think that greatly so, people such as yourself are fearful of it because of the catastrophic issue it can have. And this isn't me being like a lefty going, everyone should have cocaine and we should give it to kids in school so they can know what it's like. Absolutely not. I think that every time one of my friends says I've never tried cocaine, I say good. But I think that the issue is that maybe Hollywood media movies portray cocaine as this really sinister, evil thing, but actually
Hmm.
it's not the bad guys and the villains using it. out of the people I know, it's the highest performers, similar to we spoke about the sabotage thing, that are able to use it. And whether or not uh, self-sabotage and control, as we spoke about before, I would argue that cocaine for many people on a night out is a control thing more than an escapism thing. Because if you were to create a curvature of the impact of alcohol and having a good night, blood alcohol up, 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 holy shit, I'm fucked, kebab, go home. Where cocaine gives people and this isn't me trying to sell it, it gives people the ability to control that. Oh, I'm a bit too fucked, I'm going to take a bit of cocaine. Now I can drink more. Now I can take a bit more cocaine. And it almost plateaus that point where the 1 p.m. version of you that wants to have a kebab and go home is now a 3 a.m. more corpus mentis version of yourself, more aware of the situation pharmacologically. So that's the issue that I find, is that the majority of people that I know that do cocaine, most of which, when I got a slightly larger following and access to maybe more of the influencer scene, especially in the fitness industry, I thought none of them are going to do it. They're the worst. The fitness industry, the pin-up posters, the ones that would, I don't know, not to inflate them with Lululemon, but the type of people that would do Lululemon ads, they're the worst ones. So yeah, sorry, back to the point. I think that cocaine's terrible because it isn't so much a drug. It does wreck a lot of lives, but the majority of people actually see it as, a habit that they can control.
Hmm. Well, I think you're pointing to something very important, right? Like, notice how much of what we're talking about is about control. And, the interesting thing with high performers, because I mean, I've worked with NFL athletes, NHL athletes, entrepreneurs, rappers, musicians, Fortune 500 entrepreneurs and CEOs. And the interesting thing about high performers is that there are high levels of control. And the very interesting thing about high performance and self-sabotage is that oftentimes the way in which they are sabotaging is in an unconscious way useful to them. I'm going to explain this. I'm going to unpack this. For a lot of high performers, they are motivated by what I call dark motivation or shame-based motivation. So there's some rupture that's happened early on in life. They have a chip on their shoulder. They need to prove themselves to somebody. They've been told that their highest worth or their only value in life and existence is to perform, is to do, and is to perform exceptionally well. And so when that has been your experience, you end up utilizing pain. You end up trying to alchemize or use pain as a fuel source for action. And for a lot of high performers, they have an immense amount of shame that has just never been dealt with. They don't deal with their shame. They don't interact with their shame. And it's no shade against high performers. It's just something that I've seen to be a recurring pattern. So what do they do with all this shame? Well, it doesn't go away, right? They can't just smoke it out of existence or drink it away, or you can't ignore it. It still exists within your psyche, within your mind, within your sense of self-perception and your identity. And so what ends up happening for a lot of high performers is they try and use that shame as a motivation tool, as a motivation fuel and tactic. And when you do that, there is a trade-off. You need to be able to cope with some of the actions and the decisions that you're making, and the fact that you're using your shame, like you're just driving yourself, you're flogging yourself to get better results in the gym, or you're beating the shit out of yourself inside the way you talk to yourself. A lot of high performers that I work with, the way that they speak to themselves is heinous. It's really brutal. It's terrible. And so they're sometimes reinforcing the way that they were treated as a kid, or reinforcing that, they need to perform in order to be loved and accepted, that there's no chance of them just being loved and accepted because they exist or because of who they are without what they've achieved. And so they end up trying to utilize their shame as a means to propel them towards success. And at some point that always runs out. There's a ceiling, there's a limit to how long and how intensely you can use shame as a motivating factor, right? It might be, if you're a 400-pound fat dude and you're like, I fucking hate the way that I look, that shame for a period of time might actually support you to create enough momentum to get into the gym, to start eating healthier, because you can't stand the, being so unhealthy in the way that you look and the way that you perceive yourself. But eventually that tool of motivation, of using shame to try and motivate yourself, is going to have a net negative impact. And where it usually has a net negative impact is the athlete, the entrepreneur hits the result that they want. They have the outcome that they want. They win the award. They, their music goes platinum. Their business blows up. They hit all the blah, blah, blah. And they get that accolade. And all of a sudden they're like, I feel fucking empty. I don't feel like what I've achieved is enough. I still don't feel good enough. I still don't feel happy. I still don't like myself. And that's usually because, again, they've been using shame as a motivating fuel to try and achieve the results that they want in the life and the results that they've achieved in life. And so sabotage, where that plays in, is oftentimes, like John Jones, they're using sabotage to produce more fuel in their psyche and in their systems in order to get more results. So it's like they need to do stupid, dumb shit that they feel bad about to have more fuel to then go take more action.
Yeah, I completely feel seen with that. So as a child, my childhood was amazing. Loving parents, beautiful family home, whatever. I joked with all my ex-girlfriends that because I was adopted, that's why the relationship didn't work. So I probably got to stop using that card quite so much because I don't think adoption really had any issues with that. But then when I started school, I didn't really have many friends at school. I was a little bit overweight and out of shape at school. I just wasn't very athletic. And so I didn't get picked for any of the sport teams. And I remember probably only having like 2 friends at school and being rejected by the cool kids or the kind of popular kids at the time. And that went through to maybe secondary school. The only thing that kept me sane was probably when I was 14, I started playing rugby, which gave me a little bit of status, which I didn't know at the time. It was just suddenly there was a road to competence that I could focus on or whatever. But then I didn't really experience quote unquote success in my business till I was 26, 27. And I remember being, again, not that popular in my early 20s. And so the exact things you said there, shame as a fuel source, massive chip on my shoulder. Anyone that's watched my content can see that. And there is definitely a deep desire deep down to kind of spite all the people that didn't want to be friends with me when I was younger, that didn't think I was cool enough or didn't think that, I could be accepted into their clans. And I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me deep down that's motivated by the fact that one day they would see my book in a shop and go, fuck, maybe we should have given him time when he was 6. Maybe we should have let him come play games with us when we were 9. And I definitely do use that as a fuel source because there's an element of my self where I'd consider myself being a bit of a loser when I was younger. And again, this is the negative self-talk. And I absolutely 100% talk to myself like that. And then I've openly admitted that almost every single goalpost that I've got to has been beyond numb and hollow. But then I just very quickly move the goalpost to somewhere else. But the saving grace before someone thinks, oh, this is horrible, I'm actually very happy with that motivational mechanism for now, you're probably thinking. But one of the best things that ever happened to me was starting a family. I'm now engaged. I've got a son. I moved away from the kind of area that I used to go out and get fucked up in. I live in the quiet town on the beach with a dog and a kid and the fiance. But now I think that rather trying to go on this vendetta to prove people wrong that when I was younger, that I wasn't a loser and that I could be accepted. Now my motivation is more towards my family and providing, which I feel is a very masculine trait. And the strange thing is there was never going to be quite a barrier that you could hit as a young man that would make me sit back and go, fucking hell, that's amazing. But when there's a family involved, I feel like I can fill that cup a lot more. Is that a kind of arc that most men go on?
It can be. I mean, I want to answer that, but can I ask a question?
Oh yeah,
of you?
let's go for it.
What just happened when you were talking about your family and that shift in motivation? Like, it seemed like there's a lot of energy there, there's a big charge and almost like a lot of emotion behind it.
Yeah, so I didn't start a family on purpose. I didn't actually even get into a loving relationship on purpose. So through my 20s, I was a serial shagger. And I...
The British. Serial shagger. Thanks, Austin Powers.
Yeah, I absolutely imploded every single relationship from the inside out. Now, interestingly enough, I read Carol Dweck Mindset. And learned a bit about fixed and growth mindsets. And I thought, oh my God, I've got a growth mindset in business. You delete all my social media accounts tomorrow. I'm like, right, let's start a new one. Let's go. Yet every time I had a setback in a relationship, I was like, this fucking bitch is crazy. This girl's crazy. It's all her fault. Nothing to do with me. I used to joke going on podcasts like, oh, I found another crazy person. I never could come to the fact that I was the problem. And then
Mm.
through that pursuit, I from a sales and marketing background, my thoughts are always volume. So you need more sales, send more people to the website. You need more people on the website, grow the email list. Grow the email list, make more viral content. Everything to me is volume. So my fiance is very accepting of this as well. When I was living in Bondi, I was like, right, well, if I can go on 4 or 5 dates a week, I'll find someone eventually. And that didn't work for for years, even to the point that my volume, apologies to all the girls that I did this with, my volume was so high that I couldn't go drinking or on traditional dates with girls. So I would just go for a walk, grab a coffee or get an ice cream. This is pre-pandemic as well, thank God. Because after the pandemic, if you asked a girl if she wanted to go for a walk, they would respond saying, am I a dog? So that was a difficult dynamic for me. I just couldn't face drinking or even going on a date with someone, I think is fucking mental. So although I've done it for years, people go, right, you're going to meet a stranger, sit opposite them, have alcohol at a meal, or just have alcohol for an evening. That's a lot of commitment for me, especially with the anxiety that you get before a date. Whereas if I meet someone for a coffee for 15 minutes and we just share an almond croissant, then when you leave each other, you both have to agree to the next stage of date. If one of you's not interested, it's just a fucking almond croissant. It's not that you've committed to a whole Thursday evening. And I've always said to people, it's so nice to put jeans and aftershave on without being anxious that the person you're about to spend the evening with is a fucking psychopath or doesn't look anything like they look like. So yeah, volume was my equation to it. And then, Tay, my fiance, we met, we got on really well. Now, our circumstances were probably quite lucky. I had to leave Australia. This is during the pandemic. We'd seen each other for a couple of months. Then we had to be separated for 6 months, but we stayed in contact. It was almost like the science of a vaccine. They give you a little amount, and then your body creates the antibodies to it, and then suddenly you realize you've got immunization for whatever. So it's almost like I had a little experience of our relationship, but then I was pulled away from it before the point that I could implode it or sabotage it or completely destroy it. And I was put into another petri dish that was London for 6 months. Then when I came back, I was sure that I wanted to pursue that relationship. And that was like, I don't know, 3 months ago. Then when Tay got pregnant with our first child, it wasn't planned. So everything kind of just came into place. And then since, I don't really drink anymore. I'll probably drink, I've gone from every weekend to like 3 times a year. And even then, what's good is, I can say this openly, I can get blackout fucked up and do loads of coke and not be interested in any women. And I couldn't say that for 32 years. And I've even exposed myself to it bit by bit. And one of the tests definitely would have been Las Vegas a couple of years ago. I had to go there for work, by the way, guys. I had to go to Vegas work for a jiu-jitsu tournament. And me and one of my best friends who did a lot of serial shagging together, we went to Vegas. We, in essence, could do whatever we wanted. And we did do whatever we wanted. And that element of us that would have, he's a sabotager as well. We did it together. It made us feel better about it. We'd kind of overcome it. And there's the reason I probably have energy to it now is you could put me anywhere and I could do all of the things that would have completely imploded my life before. And instead of having that dread and anxiety, I'd wake up extremely hungover. And the only thing I was worried about was how much I spent, nothing else. And it was kind of like a weird anxiety to have. And I suppose if you were to ask me why, I've never really been that sure about many things in my life. But having a family is the one that I think I'm most sure about. And I've said before that's what I wanted, but now I have it. I'm even more sure than the preconceived notion before.
Were you actually adopted?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so and the reason I talk about, first of all, the reason I talk about snorting coke and boozing is I think it makes people feel a little bit better when they do it themselves. They can go, oh, that guy's got his life together and he's openly admitted that he's done hundreds of pills, etc., whatever. But then the reason I talk about adoption a lot is that there could be people right now going through the process of trying to have a child, and they might be looking at adoption, and they look at the landscape and they think, oh, what if this guy is, a fuck up or whatever. So, biological mother was Irish, 1989, didn't want to have a child out of wedlock, came over to the UK in secret, and did the final years of being pregnant to the point she could me up to an adoption home. My mum and dad had been trying for 10 years to have kids. They adopted my sister from an English family, and it was all like out of Chandler and Monica out of Friends. It was all prearranged. There's a picture of my sister sat on my biological mum's lap. And that was a pretty noble thing of that Irish woman to do. And there've been concerns where people say, "Do you want to meet your parents?" I don't particularly want to do that. I think there was probably enough emotional trauma from having to give up a child. Having a kid's made me think about the whole process a lot more. But although it could potentially have impacts, I don't really think there are. But that could be what adopted people say.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't. There's definitely a part of me that wants to take this into an attachment conversation,
Let's
which is a
go.
very different
I've read the book Attached
conversation.
as well,
But
trying to find out more about it.
yeah, I mean, what I will say is I haven't met somebody who's been adopted who doesn't have some form of attachment trauma, attachment issue, because your nervous system and your neurology, your brain, is wired with your biological mother's nervous system, and then you're taken from that and given to somebody else who feels very different. So,
Do you know, this is interesting because I didn't realize this until we went back to the UK, and Tay, my fiance, was asking my parents loads of questions. And they said, "How long had you tried for?" And they went, 10 years. I went, 10 years? I went, "Mum, Dad, you went 10 years." I'm like, "That's horrible." Like, I felt really bad about it. And I'd never asked them those questions. And then they said, "Oh, so how old was James when you got him?" And I was like, "Oh, from birth." They were like, No, it was 8 weeks." And I was like, "Eight
mm,
weeks? I was like, "Where was I?" I was joking at the table. I said, "Who had me for 8 weeks?" Because I knew that my biological mum gave me up the day that I was born, because I've got it in like my adoption papers. So you've got all of those parts where when my son was born, they were like chest to chest, get the contact. These are the most important stages. Don't leave him crying in a room. Then I'm suddenly thinking, hold on, where was I for 8 weeks? So
yeah, man.
there's those elements to it, which could be true. I'm open to
Well,
it.
how old is your son?
Coming up to 2. So he's going to be 2 in May.
And do you have another kid?
Not yet. We're trying.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, imagine when he was a baby being taken from are you married now?
Engaged, getting there.
Engaged. Yeah.
That's
So
my attachment style is a little bit like, oh, we got the baby, we got the dog, we got a bit of breathing room.
the order doesn't matter, I mean, we don't have to do it. I mean, I'm cautious of like going down this path because I think it's like this feels very personal. I don't know how much you
No,
want
no,
to
no.
talk about
Let's
this,
go.
but
Because I think the whole point of the podcast is to benefit people listening, and I don't think that there could be many negative outcomes from this being discussed. If that makes sense.
hmm. Well, what's your son's name?
Kian, which was my birth name.
Kian.
So,
Oh, dude.
mum Irish, we were thinking about names. So then I was originally born with the name Kian. So then I thought we'd pass it on to him.
Yeah. Well, imagine your son Kian being taken from your fiance and put in a hospital bed where somebody comes in once in a while, 5 or 6 times a day, and feeds him. And the rest of the time he's there by himself crying, maybe once in a while being held, and not knowing where your fiance has gone.
This is going to make so many of my ex-girlfriends feel better as well. As we're talking to this, they're going to go, that guy was a dickhead. That guy ghosted me. That guy broke up with me over message, over WhatsApp. And suddenly they're going to feel validated by it. Yeah, it's absolutely horrible. Even now, if I go down, so even coming here to do the podcast from home, my son's at the age now when he cries if I go downstairs. So
Mm.
the there's something crazy about it as well when you have a kid. Whenever I've heard a child cry before, I've been, oh, whatever. Have you got kids?
Yeah, I have 2, yeah.
There's something crazy now where even if a kid falls off a scooter at the park, I feel it. It's not even my kid. Before, I used to find it funny if a kid fell over in the park, but now I have one. I have one. I
I
feel,
mean, sometimes when they fall over, it's still kind of funny, you
yeah,
know? It depends on the fall. Like, my son used to pretend fall down, you know? He would, like, practice bailing off of his bike and he'd, like, run and pretend to fall down and whatnot, but yes, anyway, keep going.
yeah. So, yeah, there's that element of it. But yeah, you're completely right. The thought of that is, pretty gnarly to say the least. I have some of the most viewed videos online when it comes to creatine, but yet for years I never took it. Well, that's a lie. I did take it. I was just like you, where I'd buy the big bag of creatine, I'd put it in the cupboard, I put a scoop in my shake, and then within 2 weeks, that habit had fallen away. Then a couple months later, I thought maybe I need a brand new tub. So I buy a new tub, exact same stuff, different brand. A couple of weeks go by, scoops go in, and then I fall away from it. The issue with creatine is it takes about 3-4 weeks to get into something called saturation for it to start working. And doing something for a month without it working is pretty difficult. And there is a market for making it easier for people. And that's why we made creatine sachets with Newtonic. We use a type of creatine called Creapure, which is the best type of creatine in the world. We've mixed it with a stevia sweetener blend, which is natural, to make it taste amazing. So that mixing it in with your water isn't just something that's easy, it's enjoyable. This is the longest I've ever taken creatine for in my life. So much so, I'm willing to put my money behind it. If you try Newtonic creatine wherever you are in the world and you don't finish the box, I'll pay for it. My email address is james@newtonic.com. You fire me an email and I'll refund you in full. And that's actually me doing it out of my own money. It's not like a Newtonic refund thing. It's me giving you my cash because that's how much I believe in this product. And you might think, yeah, it's all right for you, podcaster, promoting your own stuff. It would have been a lot easier for me to promote someone else's stuff for 10 grand for this ad read, but instead I'm here promoting my own and offering you my own money. So please do check out the creatine sticks. Head to newtonic.com. Let's get back to the episode. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably something in there just for, I mean, here's what I'll do. I'll say something for you personally, and then I'll just say some stuff that I think would be very applicable for people listening. I think for you personally, a lot of the stuff that you describe, man, is like even the stuff with the bullies and even the incentivization around your personal motivation and the volume piece is very much like a reaching out, like like somebody reaching out for belonging, for enoughness, and then, being bullied and having that be another piece of like, I'll show you. And I have worked with a lot of people who have been adopted, and the they all kind of say the same thing for a period of time, which is, I don't think my adoption did anything. And it's like an addict, right? Like, I don't have a problem.
Yeah,
No, I
yeah.
don't have it. I just get fucked up every Friday and Saturday night. But I've yet to meet a person who's been adopted who genuinely wasn't affected by it. A lot of the time it's that there is that cognitive dissonance. There's a disconnection between, because it's what's called pre-verbal, right? It's before language, it's pre-memory, it's precognition. You don't have any memories of it, you don't have any words for it. And so there's a big gap of like, well, how could I even know what that was like? The problem is that it lives in, maybe not the problem, but the good thing is it lives in your neurology and it lives in your nervous system. And so this is where I'll sort of shift away and maybe be more tactical for the listener, which is, in my frame, in the work that I do and around attachment, two things I want to share. Number one is we move to control when we don't trust. So when we don't trust ourselves or we don't trust a relationship, we move to control. And when we don't trust ourselves because we're speaking to ourselves negatively, or, we're beating ourselves up or whatever, that's where we move to these controlling behaviors that reinforce a negative self-perception. I'm a piece of shit. I can't trust myself, blah, blah, blah. I always fuck things up, whatever it is. And the second thing is, in attachment, when we have a rupture to our attachment, because attachment is fundamental for human beings. We all need attachment. We all need relationship, period. It's just a fundamental. It's necessary. It's how we are wired biologically, is to attach to one another. Otherwise, it feels like we die. And there's studies of this, right? Like in Poland, post-World War II, the babies that had lost their mothers and fathers, were in these units, And the babies that weren't picked up and held died at an exponentially higher rate. They were fed and they were changed, but they weren't held. And so they couldn't connect to another nervous system. And so their bodies literally would start to shut down and they would die. And they didn't really know why, but it was because we're literally wired for attachment and connection. So we need touch, we need movement as a baby. When we have an attachment interruption as a kid and our parents or our caregivers aren't safe to attach to or to connect to get our needs met from, to say, I need something or to feel safe with, our need for attachment doesn't go away. Our need for attachment just changes. And so what ends up happening is addiction. We don't attach to a person, we attach to a substance, we attach to an object, or we attach to a behavior. Right? So instead of feeling safe to attach to a person, we end up attaching to booze, or we end up attaching to weed or porn or womanizing or sexting or, escorts or whatever it is, gambling. There's so many different things, but we still need attachment. So what we end up doing is we try and get our needs met from a substance, from an object, or from a behavior instead of a person. And a lot of the times, a lot of the men that I work with, where they're sabotaging is they're sabotaging when attachment things are happening in their life, relational issues are happening in their life. And they fall back on the sabotage behaviors or mechanisms that they used growing up in place of attachment or relationship. Okay. So you're, a high school kid. You can't talk to mom and dad about whatever. Your dad's, your parents are divorced. He's not around, or your dad's there and he's abusive, or, he's shut down, or, he's weak and he's got no spine. And so you don't bother to talk to him, or whatever the reason is. And you learn that, oh, I can't get my needs met from mom and dad. I can't connect to them in a healthy, secure way. And so what I end up doing is overeating. I attach to food, watching porn every single day. I attach to porn, sexting these women, drinking with my buddies every single night. I attach to booze and this behavior of drinking. And so that becomes this replacement or this kind of pseudo attachment. So in a lot of ways, addiction is an attachment issue. It's an attachment, it's a byproduct of attachment disorder because it's the mechanism that people use to cope with relational issues. And this is why you see things like AA. What's the main part of AA? It's relationships, right? It's you have an accountability person, you have somebody, you have a sponsor that you talk to whenever you want to use again, whenever you want to go back to that pseudo attachment of a behavior or a substance or an object. And so in many ways, the antidote to these addictive behaviors or these sabotage mechanisms is relationship. But for most of us, relationship in certain parts of it, whether it's communication or sex and intimacy or closeness, feels like a threat, right? That's the problem. And so we deploy all these sabotage mechanisms when either our sense of self-perception, our negative sense of self-perception, our negative beliefs about ourselves need to be reinforced, or when there's a challenge or problem in our relationships. And so what most guys find is that the highest intensity that they experience of when they want to sabotage is almost always when either something's happening with their intimate relationship and they feel like they're screwing up, or there's disconnection, or something's happening with their kids and they feel like they're failing them and not getting them right, or they feel like something's happening in their work, their job, that's affecting their ability to provide, to protect, to be the great husband, the great father, the great boyfriend, or whatever it is. And that's where these things really come in. So I know I said a lot. Maybe I'll just hand it back over to you.
So when we look at the cohort of, let's say, male high performers, not to say that women can't be exceptional high performers or whatever, speaking purely because I can only really talk on behalf of men and the male high performers I know. As a rough kind of, I suppose it's difficult to do this, what percentage of high performers are just dealing and coping with something in their lives?
um, Oftentimes very high. There's a very, here's the thing. When you look at addictive behaviors, and this is the catch, right? And this isn't to, there's nothing wrong with being a high performer. You know, that's how I see myself. A lot of the time, I also have, kind of the background that you're talking about with everything that we've been getting into. But when you look at the behaviors that lead to high performance and you look at the behaviors that lead to an addict, there are a lot of similarities, right? There's a high level of obsession. There's a high level of repetition. There's a high level of behaviors that reinforce something. And so there's a very fine line between mastery, greatness, exceptionalism, and addiction. And the challenge is for people to be high performers without allowing that to bleed out into these high addictive tendencies and behaviors, because they are very similar.
Yeah, like even when you say this, I think about even Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There have been moments where I've felt powerless in life, physically. Say, someone's bigger, stronger, more intimidating, more threatening. And I had one altercation with a friend on the beach who was stronger than me. And there was a moment in that altercation, we were only play fighting, that I couldn't beat him. So I started jiu-jitsu that week. And I'll probably have my black belt in about a year. So it's the exact same tendency. I've experienced that one tiny bit of, physical trauma. And I've gone away and I'm like obsessing over the ability to now control and dominate other men in a physical setting. That then I can masquerade that under, oh, it's just a sport, it's just a hobby. It's a way to stay in shape or whatever. But then when I watch footage of myself competing, I'm like, oh, this isn't congruent with what I was saying before. This looks like a little bit more than just a sport. It looks like I'm kind of venting a bit there. Would that bleed out into high performance and other things like sport for even as quote unquote a hobby?
Yeah, I mean, it can, I think, again, like I said, control is what we do when we don't trust. And that can be relationally with, a significant other, or that can be with ourselves. And I mean, look, I don't want to have like a negative perception. I don't want people to think that I have a negative perception. Like the majority of men that I work with, whether it's in my one-on-one work or, whether it's in our online community, we've got like 1,200 guys in this community called the Alliance. And the majority of them are high performers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's an amazing amount of fulfillment that can come out of this, out of working hard, out of producing results, out of achieving, greatness. You have a mission, you have a purpose in life, you have meaning, right? I mean, th- a basic psychological principle is we need to do hard shit that matters to us in order to derive meaning in life. Like that's just a basic psychological principle. When you do hard shit that matters to you and you contribute to something or someone that is important to you, what you get back is meaning. And so it's not, I don't want to make it sound like high performing is bad or, it's all terrible. It's that when we are operating in a way of trying to control every single outcome, and we need to be in control all the time, what we're really saying is that we don't trust other people and we don't trust ourselves. And control is the only way that we can feel safe. And control is the method that we use to deal with the underlying pain, insecurities, fears, anxieties, grief, and sadness that are all buried beneath the surface that are trying to be dealt with. And so, the work that I often do with people is getting high performers into a place where they can start to relinquish the control that is a coping mechanism for not feeling safe with themselves and in relationships, and starting to build real trust with themselves. And what almost always ends up happening is that not only does their performance improve, but they start to feel fulfilled because their relationships start to work and they don't view themselves as an imposter. This is a shocking thing. Like when you look at the data around imposter syndrome, this is just like a little side tangent. The data around imposter syndrome is like 80% of executives in the workplace, when polled, say that they feel like an imposter. I mean, that's insane. And so these are high performers that are put in a position. Why do they feel like that? It's because when we control, we don't we don't feel that we are worthy or deserving of the accolades and the achievements that we have put into place, that we have actually accomplished. When we trust ourselves and we have relationships with other people and we can trust them, then we can actually celebrate and accept the achievements and the accomplishments that we have in our life. And so it's not about getting rid of shame-based motivation or dark motivation. It's really about starting to shift the way that we operate and coming to contact with some of the truth of what we've experienced in life.
The imposter syndrome annoyingly has become kind of like LinkedIn posts like, oh, I've just been promoted to head of management and I'm experiencing imposter syndrome. But I get
Yeah,
it.
right.
I get it
Performative
crazy.
imposters. There's also performative imposter syndrome. Like, oh, those are usually the people that are like, I definitely fucking deserve this. Like in their head, they're like, I definitely fucking deserve this, but I'm gonna.
I've had it very strangely. Even so, let's say I sold out an event in London, Hammersmith Apollo, 3,500 people, and just before I went out, I'm thinking genuinely, I wouldn't pay £35 to come see me live. Like
Hmm.
that's a thought in my mind that I'm having to kind of battle with. And then instead of tearing myself apart with it, I just then say, well, you now have the opportunity over the next 2 hours to prove that wrong. You can go out there, give the best performance ever, make people laugh, teach them things, give it your all, and you can change that belief through action. Same way, even with podcasts, even such as yourself. Sometimes I'll be looking through your stuff and thinking, is this a good use of his time? Is this a good hour for him? Could he be doing better things? Could this potentially be wasting his time? Uh, all the time I have to battle with these kind of negative thoughts. But then is this just potentially part of a motivational mechanism I'm using to perform?
Well, I mean, part of that is likely what makes you exceptional. I mean, your level of thoughtfulness, concern, your ability to look at the details of what's happening, um, think about the other person, wanting to have a certain standard, like those things are great. The challenge is that when that becomes your way of being, this kind of chronic rumination that people fall into, that high performers fall into, that they can never shut off. And so they're holding their kids and they're not actually present with their kids because what's happening inside of them is they're just running through the task list of what needs to happen the next day, or they're retroactively thinking about the meeting that they had with, the potential buyer and running through all that, and their kids talking to them and they're completely fucking zoned out. So it's not that that behavior is bad in a certain context. It's that if you do not have the ability to switch that off, that is a form of addiction, right? And that kind of chronic rumination and contemplation and constantly thinking about things doesn't actually allow you to be in relationship with the people that you love and care about. And so what ends up happening is that they get a diminished version of you. And again, this is an attachment thing, right? Is at the core of this, it's I don't know how to fully be in relationship with the people around me. And so I need something to think about or do when I'm, talking to them or having dinner with them or whatever. I mean, the amount of executives that I've worked with that in part their wives have sent them to come and work with me because they're like, I'm tired of having another fucking dinner at a fancy restaurant where he's on his phone or thinking about something else and he's not, he's like, doesn't even know what to ask me or how I'm doing. Like there's no connection, is high, right? So it's not that it's bad. It's just that it's a context dependent. And if you can't shut it off, then it's because in part, so much of your sense of identity is hinged and dependent on your ability to perform that it feels like a threat to do anything else. So just being with your girlfriend or your fiance or your wife, just hanging out with your kids and playing dinosaurs with them and being fully immersed in that moment without the task list, without the to-dos, without the fretting about how that meeting went and the phone call and all that type of stuff. That's what we really want to look for, because again, that's another extension of control. I'm just trying to control an outcome. And so I'm going to ruminate the living. I call it mental masturbation, right? The amount of men that are just sitting there mentally jerking off about the fucking meetings that they had or the meetings they're going to have or the task list is just, it's wild, right? So we have to be able to shift out of that.
Annoyingly, my manager is probably the guy in my life that works more than me and harder than me and later than me and does more calls than me. And so it's very difficult to moan to him about stuff because he'll just be like, oh yeah, I did 13 hours on my phone today. And he'll send me a screenshot
Right.
for receipts. And I joked with him about Newtonic. I was saying to him, if say in 2 years, Coca-Cola came along and they said, we're going to buy it for $1 billion. I said, would you have 6 months off work with me? And he went, absolutely not. He said, absolutely not. Like he said, there's not an amount of money in the world. And I said, oh, what about a month? Absolutely not. 2 weeks? He was like, could maybe do 2 weeks. And I said to his wife, who's been married to for nearly 10 years, been together 15 years, I said, would you like to see him have a bit of time off? She said, absolutely not. She goes, that's the guy I married. She goes, I know what he's like. He didn't have Wi-Fi in the Maldives for 2 hours. And she goes, he was a nightmare. She goes, that to him is what makes him happy. So therefore, I need him to be that version for him to be happy. That could be a cope on both sides, but it kind of alluded to the point in my mind that maybe the workaholic nature can be someone's idiosyncrasy. But this is the issue I have in my mind. And I did a podcast with Dr. Julie, and I asked her this. I said, there's part of me, and I'm not sure if you've gone through this too, where you get to a period in time where you think, if I can be successful enough and work hard enough and sell out enough workshops, we could get to a point where if either of us get hit by a bus tomorrow, that our families are fine, that they're going to be okay, that the house is going to be paid off, all the bills are going to be paid. And whether or not this is just something that a lot of men think about, probably in a bit of a beta raging paradox, because if we were earning a tenth of what we earn, it would never even cross our mind. It would be about surviving month to month. But when you get to this period where you're making good money, but you haven't quite paid off everyone's mortgages yet, you start catastrophizing the future a bit, which is a motivational mechanism I use a lot. And you go, right, okay, I'm going to work really hard for the next 10 years so that if I get hit by a bus, my family are looked after. But then the realization comes to me, they never asked for that. They never turned up saying, I want everything paid off, so if you die, we're fine. They just want someone to play dinosaurs with and to be present at dinner. And if you do die, they'll deal with it that way. There's these two parts of my mind pulling at each other where I go, oh, do you know what? Maybe that's something that I just want, but I'm using it as a guise for what they might need to pardon my own excuses.
Hmm. And where have you landed on that?
I'm still figuring it out. The one thing that I love about psychedelics is I've had some thoughts on psychedelics that have taken me months to figure out. And it's good because I come out of a psilocybin trip and I go, I'm just going to mull that over for a few months. And then sometimes 2 or 3 months later, I'll get an answer come to me. So for instance, one example, I've spoken about this a few times before. I had a thought in a mushroom trip. Do people like me for who I am or what I do? And I simmered it for months. And about 3 months later, I went, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Even the fact I had the question made it seem like it mattered. Then afterwards, I was like, don't care. And so now, when I do have these thoughts in my mind, I think as long as there's not an imminent threat or danger, as long as I'm not turning to the butt or the bags or the bitches, might coin that, the 3 Bs.
Triple B,
Yeah.
triple B.
As long as I'm not doing that, then it's not a problem and I will simmer it over. But what I've just got to make sure is any belief that I have just needs a bit of examination because being a creative, I can think up very clever ways to trick myself into thinking things. Even, oh, I need to get a new car. Why is it? I can start taking all the algebra on the whiteboard and putting it together and go, perfect. This makes complete sense. But then at the same time, I can put together another mixture of things together as to why it would be a bad decision. So, yeah, is that something that is a masculine trait, or is it just something that someone like me that is one of the common mental folk, high-performing mental folk, HPMF, that we build these walls just to give us an excuse for working too much?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very person dependent. I worked with this guy who mid-60s and kind of like what you were describing, he had a family, he had kids, and very successful. He was in private equity, did not need to work, did not need to work at all. Um, and from his perception, I remember him saying, I don't know what I'm going to do if I'm forced to retire. I might just go out into a field and die somewhere. And straight faced, just said it straight faced. And I was like, well, why? What do you mean by that? And so I think it's when, again, there is merit in working really freaking hard. There's merit in exceptionalism. There's merit in pursuing something meaningful. There is something we derive meaning from performing and producing results. None of those things are bad or wrong. It's that if our identity has created such a dependency on that that we cannot exist without it, it might be a bit of an issue. Okay. Like replace that work or that performance with any substance or any drug or anything else like that. And you would probably say, yeah, that's problematic, right? That's a bit of an issue. And so, w- because I don't want to say this, we can adapt certain behaviors to cope with the lack or the inability of getting our needs met in relationship. Again, remember, attachment relationship is fundamental. If we don't know how to get our needs met in a relationship, human beings are insanely adaptable. We will design the most strange, screwed up, fucked up ways and paths to try and get our needs met if we don't feel like we can get them met in a relationship with friends or in an intimate relationship. We'll do all kinds of shit and we'll convince ourselves that that is the best thing to do or what we need to do in order to get our needs met because it's fundamental. It's baked into our neurology and our biology. It's just a part of us. And so, I think it can be a little bit of both. I think where the majority of people want to land, there are some cases on the fringes where guys like that, they they genuinely do not ever want to take time off. They just want to perform because the totality of their existence and their identity is constructed around performance and performing and achieving specific results. And if they don't do that, then their sense of self begins to collapse. It's a type of ego death, right? And it feels extremely hostile. And on the other side of it is there are a lot of guys that are extremely high performers who don't fucking like who they are. And so the truth of the matter, or they don't like their life, right? They don't like who they're married
Mm.
to. They don't like their kids. And so the truth of it is they don't want to stop working because if they stop performing and they stop producing results, what they'd have to come into contact with and be confronted by is the truth of who they are and what their life is. And for some of those guys, it's like, well, I don't like who I am. So it's just easier to me to work because I can get good results and I don't have to deal with the piece of shit that I feel like I am, or I can get results and be happy in my career. And I don't have to deal with the fucked up family that I have, or the fact that I hate my wife or I hate my girlfriend and I don't like my kids and they're obnoxious, entitled little whatevers. And so, it's a great avoidant tactic and mechanism. Again, it's not to shame or put down high performance. I think it's necessary. I think it's meaningful. I think it's exceptional. And I think we should also be able to be high performers and have exceptional relationships with our significant other, with our spouses, with our children. I think that is absolutely possible. Like this notion that it's lonely at the top is bullshit. You choose that. You choose being lonely at the top, or you can choose being at the top of the mountain with people that you absolutely love. That is possible. It is a choice, and it's usually a choice that you are making consciously. And if you're choosing to be lonely at the top, it's because you are so committed to controlling and you do not trust relationships and they feel like a threat. And you've been sold a lie that you're not able to be in relationship and be successful.
That's fascinating. There's another layer to this that you got me thinking about when you answered that. Another layer of pressure that I probably put on myself, I think Chris would be the same, and probably a lot of sports athletes, is where you have a set of skills and the venture capitalist has a set of skills and experiences. In most careers, it's very rare you're going to be in the career for 10 to 15 years and not have some level of tenure that you're always employable. But for Chris, myself, and probably athletes, there's an element of time-dependent relevancy where
Right.
if you do not keep feeding the pony, you lose relevancy you might not get back. So people tie themselves very carefully to the amount of followers they got, the net growth, all of those things that are happening over time. And then if that slips away from them, it can put them into despair or, sometimes even worse. So I think sometimes I catastrophize the future because in 10 years' time, there's no guarantee that people will still want to listen to me or get
Mm.
advice from me or whatever. But then again, if I look back at the last 10 years, there's no evidence that that's going to happen. So it's catastrophizing the future based on no evidence that it's necessarily going to happen. Is that something as well where maybe athletes go, oh, I've only got 1-2 years left in the NHL. After that, my whole life's going to drop off. No one's going to want to talk to me. Is that a reason that people could use that to do too much now?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, anxiety is a future-based dysfunction, right? When we're anxious about what's going to happen tomorrow. We're not anxious about what happened already. That's depression. Depression is when we're sad about what already took place and we feel like we can't get out of it. So, for some people, they're driven to get results by fear, by anxiety, and by this notion of this finiteness of I have to strike while the iron is hot. And there's certainly merit in that in some careers, right? There's athletes like, NHL, NFL that I've worked with where it's like that's true. You have a shelf life in your ability to play and earn and be exceptional, to be at the top. And and it's okay to make the trade-off. You just have to be conscious about the trade-off that you're making because a lot of the times what happens is that you don't, and I'm not saying you specifically, but I'm just talking about, high performers, is that they don't think about the trade-off that's happening and they miss the birth of their child or they miss them walking or talking for the first time or whatever it is. And it's kind of I have to do this because I'm in this period of my life where I have to succeed. And that ends up turning into a deep regret that they don't know how to get out of, that they don't know how to deal with. And so, I mean, Chris has talked about this before, but the Christopher Hitchens notion of choosing your regrets. Well, I think that you have to choose the trade-offs that you're making. It's okay for you to make a trade-off in your life so long as you are very consciously choosing that trade-off and the people in your life are choosing that with you. This is where a lot of high performance relationships go astray is that they're making a trade-off. They're making a decision to make a trade-off. I'm going to spend very little time with my children in the first, 5 years of their life because I have to be in my career and this is what I need to do right now to provide for my family to have the success. And if I don't do it now, it's not going to be possible later. That might be true. The challenges that they run into is that they don't communicate that expectation of that trade-off of, for the next 3 to 5 years, this is where I am at. Are you still willing to have kids with me? Are you still willing to be in this phase, in this chapter of my life? Like when my wife and I started dating, my now wife, we were in Manhattan and I said, I have a no raising kids in the city policy. So if you want to be with me, then you need to know that I will absolutely unequivocally never raise children in Manhattan. I just will not do that. And so if you want to be with me and you want to have a family with me and blah, 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 here's the trade-off that you have to make because she wanted to live in Manhattan always. She'd never wanted to leave. She loved the city. And I'm like the third eye blind guy, it's like New York City's evil, right? It's not actually, it's a great city. I love it. It's great to visit. It's great to live in and whatnot. But I just it's not my value. I didn't value raising children there. And so she had a decision to make about the trade-off that, being with me would be. And so I think that that's what needs to happen. High performers need to be able to be honest about the trade-offs that they're making in their life, the sacrifices that they're going to make. They need to be transparent about the sacrifices that they want to make so that the people that they're with can make choices and decisions or push back on that and say, hey, I don't know if that's in the best interest of our marriage or for our kids. Can we discuss this? And then have an open conversation about what might be workable or how to actually arrange that. And so often what ends up happening is is that high performers choose the track that they think is necessary for the outcomes and the results that they want to achieve, and let go of or don't want to come into contact with the actual sacrificing and trade-offs that are going to happen along the way, or they do come into contact with it and they don't communicate it to the people that are around them. And so all of those things need to happen. All those things need to happen. Otherwise, it turns into dysfunction, relationships blow up, people become highly resentful, which never works in the long term, right? Resentment is like acid for sex and intimacy in a relationship. You want to get rid of that at all costs. Do not let that build up in your relationship. And we have to be able to communicate it about it.
You know, the facts, I've been thinking about this recently. I was giving this advice to a friend the other day, that when you fall in love with someone, you don't just fall in love with the person, you fall in love with the life that you have with that person. And what I mean by that is exactly what you said. You could fall in love with someone who's perfect for you in Manhattan, but that same type of person might exist in Sydney, or they might exist in another region of the world. And it's not just the person that's important for life, it's the lifestyle you have with them. A friend of mine is romantically involved with someone in Australia on the beach, but she's English. So I just said, make sure that you make a decision together, because your relationship in Sydney could be very different if you have to move back home to somewhere wet and cold in the UK. And I think it's okay to say that to someone, that there's almost like a two-pronged attack to it. The same way that you said, our marriage with kids would be very different in Manhattan because you would resent her for not having the children growing up in the environment that you want. Sometimes I think we can look at relationships just as a person, and that the relationship's going to be exactly the same wherever you would be in the world. But I just don't think that is the case.
Yeah. Yeah, and not communicating your expectations. Like, I think this is a bit of a dating aside, but I think that culturally, for the most part, as a generalization, we teach men what to, like, how to treat women. We teach men how to treat women, but not what to expect from them. Not the standards that they want to have with them. But we teach women the inverse. We teach women, here's all of the things that you should expect from men, but here's not necessarily how to treat them. And this is the kind of plague in our modern relationship and dating, is that a lot of men don't have the standards or the expectations. They don't communicate the standards or the expectations that they have in the relationship. They keep them quiet. They keep them silent, which causes a lot of issues. And then for the inverse, for women, there's a lot of expectations, but there's not a lot of, here's how I treat you, here's what it is that you want and how you want to be treated in the relationship. And so it creates this dysfunction. And for high performing men specifically, what ends up happening is that there's either a shame around their trade-offs. They have shame around not spending the amount of time that they ideally want with their kids or with their significant other. And so there's just like an avoidance that gets deployed. They're afraid of the conversation, or it's seen as like a waste of energy, or because I'm the provider, because I'm the one that's going out and getting the bread, then you should just accept this, or you should just be along for the ride. But that's not how. Again, that's more control. That's not trust. And the biggest thing that we need to reinfuse our relationships with, and the biggest thing that we need to be reinfused with, is choice, right? A lot of times when you look at trauma, abuse, disconnection in relationships, what's taken or what's stolen is choice, right? Like, you didn't have a choice to be put up for adoption. You didn't have a choice. And so what does that do? Well, that produces human beings who, because their choice was taken away, they want to control to try and have their choice be prioritized. And that doesn't lead to healthy relationships. Healthy relationships are when I trust you to communicate the choice you want to make, and you trust me to make those choices as well, and we can discuss those things. And so we need to reinfuse choice back into relationships in a very meaningful way, to say, here's what I want, here's what I desire, here's what I need, and I'm going to let you choose whether or not you want that as well, and then we can have a discussion around it.
My fiance, I think one of the strengths of our relationship is she's seen, I would even argue that I was quite clearly dysfunctional in a lot of areas of our relationship. For instance, one thing that blew up a lot in the past was I'm very productive in the mornings. So between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. is my time. So I'd wake up and an ex would be like, should we go for a swim? And I'd be like, no, I've got to work. Like, what? What do you mean, go for a swim? We'll go for a swim this afternoon. I've got to work. And in my head, it was obvious because I've been set in my ways for so long. But to them, I completely see it now looking back. They were like, oh, this guy cares about his work more than me. And two things can be true at the same time. Whereas my fiance now, she kind of let me be myself and she monitors things. Or even if I impulsively had an idea for a video, she'd be like, fucking hell, let's go record the video. I'll hold the camera. Let's get this out of you, because she was emotionally aware enough to see that an idea in my head was pensively just, agitating me to the point, we'll go to dinner half an hour later. Let's go record your fucking video. And she was patient enough in those first 12 months that now we can have those discussions. And she's kind of, you know, accepting of the fact I'm imperfect, but that those very things that make me imperfect make other areas of our life much better. And I think that that's a positive on her side, where she's gone, okay, he's obsessed with his work in the morning and he is completely, disconnected from the world. He probably doesn't even know it's Wednesday. She has to remind me sometimes. I find myself telling my fiance, oh, I've got a podcast tomorrow morning, just in case I forget. So she helps me with the control aspect of that. But she was smart enough to go, okay, well, this habits and all the behaviors he has is providing him a life where he can work the hours he wants, doesn't have to go to work, etc. She could see the positives in it. So credit to her, where I think that potentially, like you said before, with the expectations, most women that I would start to date or see would see that dysfunction. And rather than it being a discussion or seeing the positives in it, it was, oh, he doesn't care about this, doesn't care about that. But it was more so me just trying to deal with myself. And one of the main things from this conversation is everyone's coping with their own shit in different ways. And some of those can be good. Some of them can be also good, but in other ways that people just need to understand. And I think that the last few years, I've really come to the fact that I'm not normal and I do have issues. And, even the fact I joked about it being linked to adopted, they say that every joke has an element of the truth in it. So
Mhm.
there's kind of maybe a deep down part of me that's always thought that. But I suppose it's great to put a positive light on dysfunction, because,
Mm.
like you say, it's not that people are bad people. It's not that people are, just addicted to alcohol or addicted to prostitutes or addicted to cocaine. Everyone's just trying to find a path to feeling better. And if they could only understand the triggers and the mechanisms a little bit more, they could get on with it and deal with it rather than thinking that they're broken.
Mm. Well, it's what pulls us out of that sabotage, you know? It's like those video games. Did you play video games growing up?
Oh, so many.
Yeah, it's like, those video games where as you explore the map, the territory gets revealed, but when you start the level, I think it's like Doom. I mean, that's like dating myself, but you explore the map and then the map gets revealed to you, and then when you've explored a territory, it stays revealed. And that's kind of how we work as human beings. There's a whole bunch of shit that we don't know and understand about ourselves. And that part of the map, that part of the psychological territory, our brain has deemed as threatening. It's deemed as scary and something to be afraid of. And because it's unknown, and so it doesn't want to move towards that. So part of our work is to be able to let go of the sabotage mechanisms, or in order to let go of the sabotage mechanisms and replace them with more generative habits and generative behaviors, whatever those might be, we have to be willing to go and venture into unfamiliar territory. And we have to know that we're going to meet a certain level of resistance towards that change and that transition. And that's the kind of price that you have to pay for ending self-sabotage, is that you have to face the fear of, I might not do this very well. I might feel incompetent at this at first. I might feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing, with this new behavior, this new exercise that I'm putting in, like whatever it is. And so that's very much in contrast, or again, it's another threat to the high performer, because the high performer loves being confident. It loves being very, very talented. And when you're dealing with things like your past or emotions or, shame or grief, Those things are more nebulous. They're a little bit more gray or vague or ambiguous, and they can feel very, very threatening. And for a lot of high performers, there's this. I think this is probably like the last piece that I'll get into. I'm curious to get your perspective on this, but there's this correlation with psychological strength. How much can I tolerate? And high performers are usually extremely highly tolerant people. They have this capacity to tolerate things that most people just cannot tolerate. The problem is that the problem is when that becomes a a kind of cancer or a wound um, or acidic, and it starts to break them down. You know, if you're in a relationship and you're tolerating things that you should not be tolerating, it's going to confuse the hell out of you about whether or not that's the right relationship. And this is the challenge that a lot of high performers have is they continue to tolerate things because they can. They continue to carry things because they can. And what ends up happening is that they are tolerating a whole bunch of things in life that aren't working for them. And then they have these coping mechanisms to help them sort of deal with the stress of carrying a lot of weight and tolerating a lot of things, some of which they absolutely need to tolerate, and that's what keeps them successful. But some of the things that they're tolerating, they shouldn't, and they need to let them go. You know, whether it's the way that they're interacting with their girlfriend or wife or whatever it is. So I think that's the final piece is if somebody's listening to this, start to really take a look at what are you tolerating or carrying in life that you know you shouldn't, that you know is not helpful for you, that you know is hindering you, and take some of that weight off. And as for the self-sabotage, know that as you start to shift that behavior, a lot of resistance is going to come up, not because the new behavior or the new action is wrong, but because your brain just loves familiarity. It's your brain's favorite drug is just what's familiar. So the booze and the cocaine and the women or whatever it is, it just loves that because it's familiar. And the unknown meditation or breath work or cold showers or, you know, therapy, that's just foreign. And so your brain is going to have resistance towards that because it doesn't know what to expect. It can't predict it. And if your brain can't predict what's going to happen, your brain will try and move you away from it.
That's been such an incredible conversation. I want to thank you for what has almost felt like a free therapy session in itself. Tell people where they can find you. Are you putting out any stuff on YouTube, long form? Where you spoke before about the community that you have. Where would you like to send people to get more information about you and your work?
Yeah, round two is actual therapy session, James. This was, I was like, I'm not gonna, next time, buddy, next time,
Joel,
or we just chat offline.
yeah,
But
we should film it. You know,
yeah, man,
I'm quite open to all of it, but yeah, we could actually do a proper therapy session.
that'd be fun, man.
Maybe we do one offline, but yeah,
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed that. That's really good, and you know, it kind of makes me appreciate a lot. Obviously, I've found some level of improvement in my life, and uh, I probably could have done with this advice in my late 20s. So I'm kind of really excited for people to listen to this. I think there's going to be 50% men listening that have gone through it or are going through it. And then actually 50% of my listenership are women. And I think it's really going to help them hear the discussion and they can relate to that and go, oh, my boyfriend or my ex or my husband, they're not, they're not I was going to say they're not fucked in the head. They kind of are, but it's okay.
Mm.
That's the kind of part I want to get from it. But yeah, let's send people to where you would like them to go to the most.
Yeah, I mean, I have a YouTube channel. It's just ManTalks, ManTalks. And I put out long form content out there about all of this stuff: attachment, self-sabotage, self-worth, relationships, etc. And then we've got a community of 11, 1,200 men from all over the world: Australia, the UK, Europe, North America, and there's a ton of resources in there. I lead calls every single week. I work with guys. I do live coaching. We've got courses, programs, community-led calls in there. So that's probably the best place to go for the guys, because there's a lot of therapeutic tools and modalities. We've got, free breath work and meditations and stuff like that in there. So you can check that out. And then I'm on Instagram as well, at ManTalks.
I'm going to put all the links to everything in the description, both on Spotify and YouTube. Thank you very much for coming on. And I think I'm going to ask you on again soon because I wanted to get into the relationship side of things. But until then,
Awesome.
Honestly, such a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.